All right, so I just did the first test drive in the 1962 Land Rover. So in this video, I'll just talk a little bit about my test driving process, how we go from doing the initial startup to actually driving down the road and starting to put miles on it. So before I even go out and do a test drive, we do what we call a pre-test drive checklist. So this is a checklist. I think it's like around 350 items that need to be checked off. It takes a full day to do. Every single fastener on the vehicle is checked for tightness. Things like fluids are checked, electrical. I mean, it's just a super comprehensive checklist. And this needs to be done right before I go out and drive the vehicle. Even though everything was checked off and marked with a paint pen during the assembly checklist, it doesn't mean that something wasn't missed. So during the pre-test drive checklist, it's basically an abbreviated version of the assembly list so that when I go out and test it, it'll be as flawless as possible. So really what that leaves me with during the test drive is making adjustments. So the first thing I'll do is drive a mile down the road to the gas station, put some gas in it, and start checking things like the clutch adjustment. On this particular one this morning, I noticed that the clutch adjustment was a little out. Usually we start them so there's 3 threads exposed in front of the first jam nut, and this one was letting out way too low. So we just tweaked it a little bit and went to 2 threads. So from there I can kind of fine tune it with the adjuster on the front of the pedal box. So on that next test drive, I'm just checking for things like brakes and steering, rattles, noises, stuff like that. And I noticed that the steering was a little too tight on it. So basically the adjuster is right here. So if that adjustment is too tight, the vehicle won't self-center easily and you'll have to kind of manually turn it back around turns. But also if it's too loose, there'll be a lot of play in the steering and you'll be constantly working the steering wheel. So I just loosened it up a hair, and then the steering was fine. There was no excessive free play, but going around turns, the vehicle would go right back to center. So another thing that I'm adjusting on this initial test drive is the EFI. So in order for it to idle properly, the idle air control valve needs to be between 2 and 10%. So amazingly, this one with just a tiny bit of adjustment went right into that range, so I was super happy with that. But sometimes it'll either read 0 or it'll read 20%, and no amount of adjustment will get it to stay within that 2 and 10%. Usually the cause of that is RF interference. RF interference is radio frequency interference, and it's caused by the spark plug wires and the coil. Some ways that we deal with this is the Sniper EFI wiring harness, the section that's not used, we make sure it has a plug in it. We also have to make sure that the routing of the wiring harness is well away from the coil wire and the spark plug wires, that everything is isolated. We also use some Bosch spark plugs that help with RF interference. We found that with certain spark plug wires, they emit a lot of RF interference and it may idle fine sometimes, and other times it may go into that hold mode where it's at 20% or 0, and then at that point it idles at like 2000 RPMs. If it does that and you shut it off and restart it and it goes back to normal, that was probably RF interference. I noticed one time on the screen of the Sniper, it actually went to like zebra stripes, and I also had the idle problem. So immediately I pulled over and I noticed that one of the spark plug wires wasn't pushed down all the way. So it was just bleeding RF interference and making everything go haywire. So another thing we're checking is the brakes. So with these 4-wheel disc brakes, the vehicle should just stop on a dime. You should just touch the pedal, and such a light vehicle like this, it should just stop. So occasionally the push rod on the brake booster does need to be adjusted. And this is a pretty simple adjustment that can still be done with the brake line still attached to the master cylinder. The master cylinder can just be unbolted from the booster, and then that slight adjustment made, and then another test drive. So once those initial adjustments are made of the brakes, the clutch, and the EFI, I'll drive it from the West Haven shop up to the old NAO Monroe shop. And during that time, I'm listening more for like rattles, really feeling out the steering. We set the toe in to 0, so sometimes it needs a slight amount of toe in, but typically 0 is perfect with these XZLs. Listening for noises, probably the most common drivetrain noise we'll find with these is a rumble from the transfer case on overrun. There's shims on the back of the transfer case that basically preload the tapered roller bearings in the transfer case. And if there isn't enough preload on those bearings, it can make like a rumble on overrun when you're neither accelerating nor decelerating. And if that's the case, we may want to take out one of those thinner shims and add a little bit more preload to it. And from these Land Rovers, there can always be rattles. There's no body mounts on these. The bodies are bolted directly to the frame without any rubber isolation. The high-low range shifter does have like an anti-rattle spring in it that's always missing. We make sure to always add those. So the main shifter has an O-ring at the bottom that kind of keeps that from rattling. The early Series 2s don't have that O-ring, so they always rattle. But the 2As up through the 3s do have that rubber O-ring on there, so that really helps with that. Sometimes there could be a rattle or a vibration of a brake line hitting the bulkhead, which creates a really annoying buzzing sound. But since we use all rubber isolated cable clamps to fasten our brake lines, we really don't have that problem as much as we did in the past. And then the last thing I'm checking for is the feel of the throttle linkage. So there's a lot of moving parts to this throttle linkage, and the factory throttle linkage will actually work perfect with the Holley Sniper, but it does need to be nice and tight and rebuilt because there's a lot of areas where holes can get ovaled and grooves can wear into linkage rods and things can get really sloppy. We want to make sure that our throttle linkage will reach 100% and that it's smooth all the way through its operation. And then probably the last thing that I'm adjusting on these longer test drives are the gauges. So we opt to use late 2A gauges in all of our builds, even if it's a Series 2. So I really like these late 2A gauges. If you add a modern semiconductor voltage stabilizer, they're a lot more reliable. So the voltage stabilizer basically just makes sure that the gauges are receiving a steady 10 volts. So the car could be putting out anywhere from between 12 volts up to 14 volts when it's running. So this just drops that down to 10 volts. And then once these gauges are adjusted, they actually read pretty accurately. The gauges are completely adjustable. On the back of the fuel gauge and the temp gauge, there's 2 slots. I just use a small flathead screwdriver and just kind of slowly push or pull on these slots till the needle is reading right where I want it to be. So to figure out where that is, I just look on the Sniper handheld. When the vehicle is at about 170 degrees, I'll put that temp gauge needle right in the end, right in the middle. And for the fuel, I fill it up, and then when I go to do my second fill up, I just note how much gas I put in it. So if I put in about 5 or 6 gallons, I'll just adjust that needle so it's right in the middle. And then with each fill up, I'll just kind of check to see how that correlates with the fuel gauge, and I'll just make smaller adjustments here and there. But the late 2A adjustable gauges are certainly an excellent upgrade on these early vehicles. So these test drives are all about checking the function of the vehicle and doing adjustments, but it's also about fun and enjoying the drive. People that have never owned a fully restored and upgraded Series 2A are totally missing out. The test driving is my absolute favorite part of the build process. Every time I take it out, I get a thumbs up or someone complimenting the vehicle. I did 2 test drives today and I got 2 compliments. I'm at 31 miles today, which is pretty good. So I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna keep putting miles on this vehicle, really break in the engine right, because this is a fully rebuilt engine. It was bored out, the crank was cut, it has a fully rebuilt head. So this really needs to be broken in properly. We use a high zinc break-in oil during this process. And when we get to the end of that 500 miles, we'll change that out and put regular oil in it so that the customer is good to go. You can just drive the vehicle like normal and you don't have to deal with any of the stress of a proper engine break-in. So I looked the vehicle over, I made a few adjustments, and now I'm gonna head back to the West Haven shop. But tomorrow, I'm gonna take this on the longer test drive. So I'm gonna go up Route 7, following the Housatonic River, up into the Berkshire Mountains of Massachusetts. Basically, I'm gonna be driving the vehicle the way it's designed to be driven and enjoyed. And to do this, I think I'm actually gonna even leave the top off. I think I'll be able to get a whole bunch of miles on it and get this vehicle one step closer to the owner taking delivery of it and the vehicle going out to California.